Let's take a look at how to set up a biped crowd simulation. Now this is a crowd simulation that uses bipeds. The bipeds will be walking around, and this file is called dinocrowd.max. We're going to take a look at how I've set up this file. I haven't done any solving yet, I've just got set up for it. Before you do anything with biped crowds, you really need to understand how crowds work. So you should do a few basic crowd scenes before you try to work with biped crowds. So what I've got here is I've got a sort of a walking area path, and here's a something that might be a fountain or some big plant or something. And you would have a walkway like this at a shopping mall or perhaps out in a park. And I've got these two paths set up, these two dark blue lines. Each of them is a path, and I'm going to have the delegates follow the path. And we could set it up so they don't follow the path exactly. They could deviate off the path a little bit one way or another. So it'll be a nice natural looking walk motion. Now these two are going to be heading this way, and these two are going to be heading this way. And we're going to be attaching these bipeds to them. And when they meet here, they should pass by each other without knocking into one another. So we'll see if we can get that to work. As for the bipeds, I've got 10 bipeds, and each of these 10 bipeds, or 9 bipeds rather, and each one has a mesh associated with it which has been hidden. Now in order to do this, I had to create several groups of bipeds. For example, what I did was I started with one and changed its name, and also changed the name of its mesh. And then I'd merge in the same one I had just been using and change its name and so on until I had a big collection of them, and then I merged them into this scene. So that takes a bit of work. And creating the name selection sets took a bit of work too, and hiding the meshes and so on. But it wasn't long. It was only about 15-20 minutes worth of work, and now I've got all my bipeds set up. Now you don't have to worry about putting the bipeds on top of the delegates, because once you set up your behaviors and you solve the simulation, the bipeds will automatically jump to the delegate that they're associated with. So for now they can just hang out over here. So that shows you your basic setup for a crowd scene. We have delegates, we have something for the delegates to do, which is going to be to follow this path and avoid each other. And we have our crowd helper, and we've got our bipeds all ready to go. So let's get started setting up our behaviors to use with the crowd scene. We're going to need a couple of path follow behaviors, actually 4 of them. We have these 2 delegates following this path going this way, these 2 delegates following this path going this way. Now the path was created starting here, so this is considered the forward direction, and this is considered the backward direction. And when you set up a path follow behavior, it's going to ask you which direction you want to go in. So these have to go forward and these will go backwards. So we need 2 different behaviors for that, and also 2 for this side. So let's get that set up. Behaviors new. We have the path follow behavior here. So let's label these. This is the right path, and it's actually named path right. And this is the left path. So we'll call this the near delegates and this the far delegates. So we'll start here with the right near delegates. We'll set up a behavior for them. So I'm changing the name of the behavior so we know what it is. We will select path right. Now we want the delegates to stay within a certain radius of the path. And I've measured this, and the radius I want to use is about 100 units. You can measure it with a box or a tape or whatever, but basically it's a number of units on either side of the path that the delegates can stray to. And it makes for a nice natural motion, so they're not all following this exact path. For their starting point, we want them to start at the nearest point of the path that they're on. We don't want them to all go to the end. And they're going to be going backward because, again, this was the way the path was created, and so that's the forward direction. When they get to the end of the path, we want them to continue going straight. We don't expect that they will get to the end over the course of the animation, but they might. So that sets up that one behavior. So we'll set up the other ones quickly. Path follow right far. Uses the same path. The radius is 100. Nearest point, going forward, continue. There's that one. Then path follow left near, uses this. Same radius, nearest point, going backwards and continuing. Left far. Select the path. Oh, I think I forgot to select the path on the last one. We'll do that in a moment. The left far, they go forward and they continue. So let's look at left near. No, I did pick the path. Got the path on all of them. So we're all set. We've got these 4 behaviors. So let's save this. It's a good time to save with a plus. So we've got Dino Crowd 01. So now that we've got our path follow behaviors set up, let's set up some teams that we can assign these behaviors to. So we go to our behavior assignments, and before we can do this, we need to know which delegates we're going to assign to teams. So let's select these and look at the names. We have Delegate 5 and Delegate 2. Those are the 2 right here. Those are our right near delegates. So we'll come here, 2 and 5. And we could rename this to right near. Now, after you enter a team name, don't press enter because that will exit the dialog. If you click over here, it'll show up. So these right near, these go to path follow right near, and here they go. These down here, Delegate 9 and 8, and those are our right far. 8 and 9. Right far. Right far, path follow right far. There we go. Now I know from playing around with this before that 1 through 5 are the delegate numbers here, and since we already had 2 and 5, these must be 1, 3, and 4. So we have a new team with 1, 3, and 4. And these are our left near. And because 8 and 9 were here, the others must be 6 and 7. And these are our left far. So now all of our path follow behaviors are set up. Let's take a look at how they go. Let's go ahead and solve. Well, they're going kind of slow. That's one problem. So we can't really see if they're going to follow the path. You know, the simulation's all over now. The other thing is that these guys are facing the wrong way on frame 0. Oops. Let's fix that by turning these around. We want to leave them on the same side. We just turn them around. Then they don't have to turn around at the beginning of the simulation. It's just better. Now they're also all going kind of slow. That's because of the delegate's average speed. If you select a delegate and go to the Modify panel, you can see they have all these parameters, and one of them is average speed. Now we could select each one and change its average speed, but it would take a while. What we can do instead is select the crowd helper and we have this button here, Multiple Delegate Editing. If we click that, now this big dialog comes up that has all of the delegate parameters on it. So we can change the average speed here for all of them at once. So we click Add, pick all the delegates. Now we're going to change the average speed to 10. We click Set, and that indicates that when we click Apply Edit here, that this change will take place. So we apply the edit. Alright, now let's solve again and see what happens. They're moving a little faster. And this is probably not quite as fast as the bipeds are going to go. I mean, it's faster than the bipeds are going to go. But it's around the same ballpark, so they look pretty good. Now let's give it more time to solve. If we scroll down here to our solve rollout, we could first of all change the length of the animation in the usual way. Then here, change end solve to 300. We can tell it that we only want it to save a key every 5th frame, which would be sufficient, and delete keys before solve means it's going to get rid of all the keys it's got on every single keyframe before it solves again. And when it updates to the display, we can just tell it to update it every 5th frame. So let's try that again. Try solving. The solution goes faster and it's longer. So they're moving along pretty well. Looks good. Maybe make that a bit longer, 400. And we'll solve that again real quick. Now we've got a problem here that they're passing through one another. Now that happens, you know, unless you have an avoid behavior. So we need to throw an avoid behavior on there, and then I think we're probably going to be ready to go with the bipeds. So let's do an avoid, and we only need one avoid behavior for everybody because they're all going to avoid each other. And we're going to go and assign it, and let's make a new team with everybody in it. We'll call it all. Remember, delegates can be in more than one team. No problem at all with that. And they'll all avoid each other. So let's try this one more time with the solution. So this looks like it's going to be pretty good. Yeah, they're not knocking into each other anymore. And this is what you want to do when you're going to do a biped crowd scene. You want to get the simulation working fairly well without the bipeds first. Just because when you're troubleshooting later on, if you know that the simulation with the delegates alone is fine, you can not worry about that and just focus on the bipeds. So this is the way we set it up. So that's good. We'll go ahead and save this with the plus as Dino Crowd 02. Now that we've got the delegates animated pretty well, we can take a look at the different types of motions we can start to use on these bipeds. Now, in order for the bipeds to work with this crowd scene, they have to have a bunch of BIP files that they can follow that we're going to put in a motion flow graph. So let's take a look at some of the BIP files that we have available to us. I'm going to just go ahead and load a biped, and we're going to put a motion file on it to see what it looks like. Now, one of the ones I've prepared here is called Walk Loop. And this is basically a loop of the biped walking. Now, the way I've set this up, if you look at it on frame 0 here, he's got his right foot in the passing position, and then it goes through the left foot in the passing position, right foot through the passing position, and then the left foot up again, and that's the end of it. So basically, it goes through 20 frames, and then here the left foot is in the passing position, and then right foot, then left. So frame 20 matches frame 60. And basically what that does is this gives us 20 frames in here between 40 and 60 with which to overlap the beginning and the end and make a nice smooth transition. Now, the way I made this, I actually started with footsteps. So I've got this walk cycle with footsteps. Now I actually created it with freeform first and then converted it to footsteps, and here's the reason why. This is great for the biped walking forward, but over the course of the simulation, he's going to go around corners. So we need to have some walk motions that are going to the left or the right, and the easiest way to do that is with footsteps. For example, here I can go into footstep mode and just select these footsteps and then use a bend on them. And here, now, the footsteps go about 20 degrees to the left. So then I could save a BIP file with those going 20 degrees to the left. Now I could at this point choose Save File and save to this one. It's going to the right. The biped's right, so that would be 20 to the right. That's what's in that BIP file, and I could just save over this and use this motion, but actually I prefer to use freeform animation rather than footsteps when I'm doing a crowd scene. The reason is that as each biped's motion script is developed, the BIP file, if there's footsteps, the footsteps are going to appear on the screen, and I find it makes the screen quite cluttered. So what you can do instead is convert to freeform and then save the BIP file. So I turn off my footstep mode, convert, and I don't like to do a keyframe per frame. I prefer to not do that because then we keep our IK blend keys if we do that. If you do a keyframe per frame, you're going to lose your IK blending. Click OK, and we still have our walk cycle with the IK blend keys. And then we click Save, and now I can save this as 20 to the right. Now notice I've turned this on, Save Segment at Current Position and Rotation, because that allows me to turn this off, a keyframe per frame. I want that off. I'm not going to save max objects. So I click Save, and it already exists, so I'm just going to save over it. So you can do that for a number of motions. You start out with your footsteps, go into footstep mode, select the footsteps and bend them to the left or the right, turn off footstep mode, convert, and then save to whatever BIP file you want. So we have a series of motions here. I also have one where I have him turning to the left a little 20 degrees and to the right 20 degrees, turning to the left 40 degrees and to the right 40 degrees. That's a more severe turn. I've also got this one called Walk Start, where he's in a standing position and goes into a walking. So that's if he's stopped. He can start from that stopped position. And then we've got one where he's walking and he stops. In case he doesn't have room to walk, at least he can stop. And we've got another one called One Step. This is just in case there are situations where the biped can't go anywhere without knocking into somebody, and he needs to just, it's almost like standing still. He's just going to take a step forward, but not move very far. I don't expect that one to get used very much, but we have it in case we need it. So those are all the motions that we have available to us, and with that in mind, now we can head back to our crowd scene and start using them. The next thing we want to do is take a closer look at our motion files to see where we should put the transitions and how long they should be. So I've just got the basic biped loaded here. I'm going to go ahead and load a motion file on it, our walk loop. Now we have a few choices here because we have the 20 frames at the beginning and end that overlap. From 40 to 60 is the same as 0 to 20. We have a number of choices here. Now, one of the things is that we have this situation here that at frame 10, for example, both feet are down and both have an IK key on them. The IK blend is set to 1. This is not a good time for a transition because on our other motion clips, the biped is turning, and at the beginning or the end, the feet might be in a different relationship to one another. So if you're trying to make a transition from both feet down in one pose to both feet down in another pose, one of the feet is going to have to slide. So that's not a good time to have your transition. On the other hand, just a couple frames later here, this left foot is in a free key. If we look here, when it's down, its IK blend is 1. Then a few frames later, after frame 10, IK blend is 0, meaning it's a free key and it can move freely. So this time right in here is a really good time to have the transition, because the body will be able to twist and change, keeping the right foot planted down freely, and the left foot can do whatever it wants while it's swinging in the air. So if we start the transition around, say, frame 12, let's just keep that in mind, starting at 12 and ending sometime before 30 when it gets planted down again. Now let's take a look at where at the end of the loop that this same motion takes place. Now right here at frame 50, the left foot is down, then it's coming up again. So around frame 52 corresponds with frame 12. Now at frame 52, we've only got 8 more frames before the end. So we could do an 8-frame transition here, starting at frame 12 of the second clip in whatever transition sequence you're doing, and starting at frame 52 of the previous one. So just keep that in mind, 8 frames, and we'll be using that when we set up more of the crowd simulation in a minute. Now that we know which clips we're going to use and the length of our preferred transition, we can go ahead and set up the rest of the simulation here for use with bipeds. The way we do that is we select any biped, go to the motion panel, and go into motion flow mode. Now down here on the motion flow rollout, we can set up our motion flow graph. And here we want to add clips to the graph. Create multiple clips, and we're going to choose just our looping walk clips here. The ones that stop and start, we don't know if we're going to need those, so why don't we just try it with these for now and see what happens. This one's going to be easier to set up anyway because you have all these clips that will loop seamlessly to one another. So let's set up our transitions, select all the clips, and choose Create All Transitions, and we are going to choose to create transitions from each selected clip to itself. So there we have them. Now by default, you can click and then right-click here to see what kind of default transitions you have. The length is 24 by default, and we've already looked at that and determined that 8 frames is probably a better transition length. So let's select all the transitions, choose Optimize Selected Transitions, and we're going to change our preferred transition length to 8 and tell it to search the entire clip. Click OK. Now the default transitions are usually pretty good. They might or might not be. We'll go ahead and use it in our simulation and see how it turns out. The next thing we need to do is choose a random start clip, and we're going to choose the walk loop so they start out walking forward. So now our graph is all set and ready to go, and we just need to save it. And I'm going to save it with the name crowd.mfv. I already have one with that name, but I'm going to save over it. And that's how you make the graph. So now that the graph is created, we need to share it between all the bipeds. And the way we do that is with shared motion flow. So we click this. We need to click New to start a new shared motion flow. You can have several shared motion flows in the scene. We're only going to have one in this one. Then we need to load the MFV and add the bipeds. When we click OK here, that MFV file, the one back here, will be applied to all these bipeds. And here, this button has a white circle on it, indicating that the graph is shared between this biped, selected biped, and all the others as well. Next, we'll set up the delegates and the biped so that it works with the crowd scene. We don't need our graph anymore, since it's been saved and shared already. Now we need to tell the delegates that each of them is associated with a biped. Now you can do that individually. You could select a delegate and go to the Modify panel, and down here at the bottom you could click here and pick a biped. You have to click right on the center of mass and then say Use Biped. Now that doesn't change the location of the biped. It just means that when you solve, it's going to, at the time of the first solving, that biped is going to jump to the location of the delegate. But there's a quicker way to do this. With the crowd helper selected, you can click Biped Delegate Associations. And if we choose bipeds here, and then choose delegates, then make specified associations and set delegates to use biped. So this checks that use biped checkbox down there that we saw when the delegate was selected, and this makes a one-to-one association. And we don't care which biped is associated with which delegate, so that's just fine. So we say associate. Okay, and now let's save our scene. Now we have to set up each delegate so that its biped is set up to use the random start clip. So to do that, we have to go to Multiple Delegate Editing. Now here, these bipeds are already set up to use biped, but each of them is also set to use the first clip of the current script. And there's no script. We didn't create any scripts for our motion flow network. What we do have is a random start clip. So we need to say, use the random start clip, set. All our delegates are already selected from some work we did earlier. Apply edit. So now they should be ready to go. Let's do a solve. Now you see that the bipeds all immediately jumped, each one to its delegate, and they're walking along. We have the solution set up to go to 400 frames. So let's see how far they get after 400 frames. I think we're going to need more than that. Some of them are taking turning bip files rather, in their scripts. Now what's happening here is a different script is being generated for each biped. Okay, we're up to 400. So in general, it worked pretty well. The delegates sway because they're going with the center of mass, which is turning with the hips as the characters walk. So they did move along okay. And when they get here to where they're supposed to turn, each one is turning relatively well. Okay, let's take a look at how we can improve this. For one thing, they're all sort of marching along, doing the same thing. Looks pretty uniform. What we can do to mix it up a bit is we can give each one a different starting time. So what we can do is, let's make it so we can only select helpers. For this delegate, give it a start frame of 4. This one can start just at a later time. We'll just mix it up a little bit so they have different kinds of start times. And that will delay the start of each clip so that they don't all start at the same time. And you can also set this up randomly. I'll show you in a moment after I get done with these two. This guy back here, we'll just give him 15. Now if you wanted to, you could just select the crowd helper and go here to Multiple Delegate Editing, and you can put in a random start frame here. But I wanted to make it so that the ones in the front start earlier than the ones in the back. So to do that, you need to do it manually, or there are some tools down here under Priority for setting start frames. Okay, having done that, it should mix up the motion a little bit. Also, I'd like to make this longer. Let's go for 1300. Set our solve for 1300. Delete keys before solve. And we only need to update the display every 50 frames. I think that'll be sufficient. Alright, we're ready to solve. So they're moving forward. And let's see if they're still moving identically. I'm going to stop the solving and just go take a look here. So they're not all moving exactly the same anymore, and that will mix it up nicely. Okay, let's save this before we solve the rest of it. I've gone ahead and solved this, so let's take a look at what it looks like. So far, so good. Biped's walking along. Time to turn the corner, and they start going around the corner. And everything seems fine, but in a minute we're going to have a problem. Right about here. Let's take a closer look at this side here. These guys are going right through one another. Now we do have an avoid behavior on these guys, but when you're using motion clips with a biped, the avoid behavior that works fine on delegates alone is not sophisticated enough to take into account the motion files and how long each motion clip goes, say 40 or 50 frames, where the biped's going to end up, and how it can pick the best clip so that the bipeds don't collide. They can't do that. What we have is we have a special avoid utility that is just for bipeds, and that's called backtracking. Now the way backtracking works is that we've got priorities for each delegate. Each delegate gets assigned a priority number. So say we select a delegate, you see down here this priority. Right now, by default, they all have a priority of 0, which is considered the highest priority, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on are lower and lower priorities. And when you use backtracking, if you're supposed to have different priorities for each delegate, and the one with the highest priority, say 0, is solved first, and the biped goes all the way to the end of the animation. Then priority 1 is solved, and if that biped crashes into the first biped at any time, then the solution backtracks to the previous transition to try and find a clip that will not result in a collision, and it uses that clip instead and continues forward. If it can't find a clip that won't work, it backtracks again to the previous transition and so on until it finds a series where the bipeds won't collide. So the first step in this is to assign priorities. So let's go ahead and try that, and we'll use the top viewport. So what we want is we want these guys in the front to have the highest priority and then the ones behind to have a lower one. And if we select the crowd helper, we have this utility here where we can pick and assign priorities starting with 0. And down here we could set it to display priorities. So as we set them, we'll see them change. You can see right now there's a little 0 next to each one, indicating that each one has a priority of 0. So let's go ahead and start assigning them. This one gets 0. And how about 1 here? 2, 3. We'll do 4 and 5 down here. 6, 7, and 8. So now the priorities are set up, and this is we can solve again with backtracking. Now in order to do that, we need to come here to the solve rollout, to the bottom of it, turn on biped delegates only, use priorities, and backtracking. And before we do the solution, let's save again. Always a good idea. Now when you go to solve again after setting priorities, you might get a message like this that tells you that you don't have your priorities and your start frames increasing the same way. That's okay. You know, as long as you've set up your priorities and your start frames fairly intelligently, it should work okay. So off it goes and it starts solving. Now you'll see that the one with priority 0, he's the only one moving along. The rest of the delegates are going along according to a sort of basic solution. They aren't really used though now. It's not checking for any kind of collisions with 0, with the one with priority 0. So he gets all the way to the end there. No problem at all. Now it's going to start solving the one with the next priority, which is this fellow right here. And he's going around the other side, so he's not going to run into any problems. The first time that you solve with backtracking, it's pretty interesting to watch, which is why we're watching it now. In the future, it's not a good idea to sit and watch it because it can take a long time, especially if you have 10 or 15 or more bipeds in your scene. But it is pretty reliable. It's the sort of thing you can let it run for 2 or 3 hours, and a lot of times that will work out really well. Now we've got this fellow walking along. And let's see if he bumps into this other guy. And there you can see here it's backing up and trying different solutions so that it doesn't crash into this biped with the one priority on it that was just solved a minute ago. So it's going to keep backing up. It's going to try moving to the left, moving to the right, trying different solutions. And if it can't find anything, it'll go back to the previous transition. And we have few enough bipeds here, just 9 bipeds. They're fairly well spread out, and enough motion clips that eventually it does find one that works out, and off it goes. Now you can sometimes get into a situation where the system backtracks and backtracks and it ends up backtracking all the way to the beginning of the animation and it still can't find anything that's going to work. In that case, there's a couple of different things you can do. You can add more motion clips so it has more choices. For example, if that happened to us, we could put in the clips that stop so that a biped has a choice of stopping and then it won't crash into whatever it was about to crash into. Another choice you have is to separate the bipeds apart a little bit more at the beginning of the animation. You can move the delegates apart, and the next time you solve, the bipeds will jump to where the delegates are. You can also change the priorities, change the start frames. There's a number of things you can do to make it work right. You don't need to watch this whole solution, so I'm going to skip ahead here to where the solution is finished. Now the backtracked solution is done. Let's take a look at how it works. Go ahead and play it. Bipeds walking forward as they were before. Nothing really different here. And let's see how they do when they get a little closer to one another. Now we can already see that this guy has gone to the outside, as has this one. And let's stop this and get a really close look at what goes on here. They come pretty close to one another, but they don't crash. And that's the nice thing about backtracking. Now we do have a problem where this fellow goes through here. The way to get around that would be to create more motion clips that the bipeds can choose from. You might have a couple where he's walking slower or faster, turning a little slower or faster. You know, you could easily add 4 or 5 additional clips, and then he wouldn't have to walk through our little cylinder here in the middle. But all in all, it looks pretty good. So we'll go ahead and save that. Now obviously you could improve this a number of ways, but you have all the tools that you need right now. You know how to set up a graph, and to add to the graph, all you would need to do is select one of the bipeds, and on the motion panel, open your graph, add more clips, put in your transitions and so on, and just save the graph. You don't need to redo the shared motion flow. If you resave the new graph, it will get used the next time around. So that's how you set up a biped crowd scene.